The honourable member for Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honour to rise again in this place to speak to the concerns I have about Bill C-30, legislation to enact the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union. There are a number of fallacies that come up and have come up in the debates today, and I'll try to address those. But I want to start, and those relate, by the way, to the investor-state provisions, which I believe to be the key and most unacceptable part of the trade agreement. But I want to make sure I don't slip over and skip over the other concerns that have been raised by many in Canada and as well in the European Union. One is that this trade agreement will absolutely make pharmaceutical drugs cost more in Canada. There's no question about this. It will, by giving greater patent protection, postponing the moment when drugs go to generic form when they become much more affordable. So the estimates are anywhere between $800 million and $1.6 billion that it will increase the cost of pharmaceutical drugs. Let me give you the reasons why. This is what the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement commits to and C-30 will implement. It will commit Canada to creating a new system of patent term restoration that will delay the entry of generic medicines by up to 2 years. It will lock in Canada's current terms of data protection, making it difficult or impossible for future governments to reverse them. And it will implement a new right of appeal under the patent linkage system that will create further delays for the entry of generics. This trade agreement is in the interests of big pharma. The pharmaceutical industry, I'd have to mention, an economic sector that doesn't need a handout. Can we accept that the prescription drug business, the pharmaceutical industry globally, does very well for itself and doesn't necessarily do well for those who need life-saving drugs? We've seen very clearly, and this relates to the debates we have in this place about the need for pharmacare and a national pharmacare program. It's even in the mandate letter to our Minister of Health to pursue bulk purchasing of prescription drugs to try to bring down the price through the leverage you can get when, if we had a national pharmacare plan, all prescription medication could be purchased centrally and try to drive down the cost. The reality is the single largest growing cost within our healthcare system is the cost for prescription drugs. As the honourable colleague from Oakville who lost his seat in the last election, Terrence Young, I want to reference his hard work. His daughter died from taking a drug as prescribed by her physician. Her name was Vanessa, and in the last Parliament we passed Vanessa's law. It's very clear that the drug industry charges more than what it costs to produce a drug because they can. So this is the last sector on earth that we should be wanting to give yet more advantages to make the price of drugs go higher. At the same time, the way in which litigation relating to pharmaceuticals, the notice of compliance proceedings dealing with full patent infringement, have been termed by Canadian Lawyer magazine as streamlining litigation, again, to the benefit of the pharmaceutical industry. They have a very effective lobby. I mean, we will say hats off to the pharmaceutical industry in Europe and in Canada for getting their own way under this agreement. But that doesn't mean it's in the interest of Canadians. I'm also very concerned, as is the Green Party, in the protection of procurement. This has to do with the rights of municipalities and other government sectors to say, look, we want the right to choose where we procure our products. We want to say it's okay to preference our local suppliers. That won't be possible under CETA. We also know that the way in which this agreement is structured around intellectual property leaves a lot to be desired and doesn't adequately protect Canadian companies in the large, more predatory global marketplace. But getting to the misconceptions, one which was, I thought, rather unexpected in this debate, just to put it to rest, I heard a number of Conservative MPs use this debate on the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement with the European Union to rail against having carbon prices. This was a very unusual place to make that argument, since the European Union has carbon prices. So why in a debate on CETA would we hear distorted arguments about the economic impact of putting a carbon price in place. It's rather the contrary. If Canada doesn't put a carbon price in place, we might find ourselves at the other end of discriminatory tariffs brought forward by the European Union because they have done so and they want trading partners to do so as well. Other fallacies have to do with the way in which we characterize investor-state dispute resolution. It's very important that we distinguish and differentiate between terms of trade agreements to resolve disputes over trade. We have those in NAFTA, we have those in CETA, we have those at the WTO. When you have a dispute over a tariff or an alleged subsidy, you have a dispute process that resolves trade disputes. The investor-state provisions are not those. Investor-state provisions have nothing to do with resolving trade disputes. Now, that may seem so counterintuitive, but let me back up and say trade dispute mechanisms within treaties are state to state. Canada has a problem with, say, Belgium, or Poland has a problem with Canada. The investor-state dispute resolution is entirely different. It gives, if we go ahead with CETA, a Polish company the right to sue Canada if any government, state, provincial, municipal, First Nations, or court decision, or federal, makes a decision which interferes with that corporation's expectation of profits. So it's not state to state, as it would be in a trade dispute, it's corporation to government. Let's use a real-life example from my home province. The people of Kamloops, BC, are busy fighting a proposal for a large open-pit mine within the town limits. It's called the Ajax mine, and it's being proposed by, yes, a Polish state-owned enterprise. Now, if CETA is not in place and the government of British Columbia decides we are not going to go ahead with an open-pit mine in the town limits of Kamloops, we're a mining community. Kamloops has other mines. It's not as if they're against mines, but the majority of people in Kamloops do not want an open-pit mine in the town limits. If CETA isn't in place, that's the end of the story. BC can make a decision, Kamloops can make a decision. But if CETA is in place, it's not the end of the story. Then the Polish mining company, Ajax Mine, can do what Bilcon did from New Jersey under Chapter 11 of NAFTA when their mine was turned down by the Conservative government of Nova Scotia and the Conservative government federally under the previous Environment Minister John Baird turned down Bilcon's open pit mine on Digby Neck, Nova Scotia. But Bilcon just went for a secret tribunal under Chapter 11 of NAFTA, sued us for $300 million. Did they allege we were wrong on the science? No. Did they say this was a secret protectionist move to protect trade in Canada? No. They just said, we don't think the environmental assessment process was fair to us. Ajax, Polish mining company, would have the right to bring secret arbitration cases. Now, the one thing that's different under CETA is the process would not be as secret. There'd be an investment court, but there'd be no room at the table to have litigants representing the public interest. No environmental group will be allowed before the so-called investment court to argue. This was a reasonable decision that our government made. So the presence of these agreements, they really need to be much better understood. Investor-state agreements, the Chapter 11s, or sometimes called FIPAs, the Foreign Investor Protection Agreement, such as the one that Prime Minister Harper passed secretly in Cabinet that binds Canada till the year 2045, so that any corporation within the People's Republic of China has the right to sue Canada, and we can't get out of it till 2045. These agreements need to be better understood as fundamentally corrosive to democracy. They don't belong in trade treaties. They have nothing to do with advancing trade. They're all about reducing the power of sovereign governments and increasing the power of transnational corporations. And that's why I will be voting against C30.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments from the Leader of the Green Party. And when the member makes reference to the fact that you have a company overseas that would then be able to make a statement of claim against an entity here in Canada. I wonder if she can provide some comment in regards to the reciprocal to that, where a company in Canada and the rights that they would be able to have as a result of this particular agreement.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for Winnipeg North. I'm glad for the question. This is an open question. In essence, there would be reciprocity, but for one thing. This provision is still so controversial within the European Union. It's still going to the European Court of Justice. We don't know if it will be ruled to be ultra vires of the European Union to put such a provision in their treaties. But we know from the state of Walloon within Belgium that the EU has now accepted the notion that individual countries within the European Union can opt out. So will it be reciprocal? I think the answer to that has to be, it depends. If a Canadian corporation loses money in the state of Walloon, I don't think they're going to be able to rely on something that if a Polish company brings an action against Canada, and by the way, although the actions may have been provincial, municipal, or state or federal, the litigation is always against the federal government. And our federal government has paid out millions of dollars under previous investor-state resolution decisions for things where we did not do a single thing wrong or protectionist or against the science. We just cost a foreign corporation money.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The question is, I know the honourable member spoke about the impact on the pharmaceutical industry or the cost of drugs or the investor-state provision. This is on a negative side. I would really appreciate if she can highlight some of the positive items of CETA. That would be actually, in fairness to the discussion here, would be nice if we can hear about the positive side of the CETA from the honourable member.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, thank the honourable colleague from Edmonton for his question. I think it should be clear by now that I think the negatives outweigh the positives, but opening up trade with the European Union is an important balance. We certainly already have, and I think this is one of the things that gets overlooked in these debates as well, the general agreement on tariffs and trade, and after the Uruguay round, the creation of the World Trade Organization, means that the protectionist measures that people railed against in the call for free trade are already gone. We already have, in that sense, free trade with the European Union, with the individual states within the European Union, because protectionist measures that are unjustified are already prohibited under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. But opening up more connection to the European Union is certainly wise. We know that our traditional best trading partner south of the border, as is at the moment, in the hands, at least the executive, is in the hands of an unpredictable, reckless, and potentially damaging partner. We hope we can steer through that. We hope we can navigate that. But trade with the European Union is going to be important.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Leader of the Green Party and the member from Saanich, the Gulf Islands, for bringing up some very valid concerns around CETA. One thing she didn't touch on very much was that this will be the first time that legally allowed foreign-owned vessels and foreign crews will be allowed to transport goods between Canadian ports, and will open up domestic dredging contracts to foreign suppliers. In my riding and in my community, we have a company called G&N Towing. It's named after the founders, Gail and Neil Botting. And their son, Gord, now runs that business, and his sons crew that boat. It's a family business where they've got local knowledge. They employ people from Essawista, from Opitsit, from Tofino, local communities. These jobs are critical to the lifeline of our coastal communities. And local knowledge not only saves lives, but it protects the environment. And these are very important that we protect local jobs. So I'll ask the member if she shares our concern around the lack of analysis and the economic impact of taking away these jobs from coastal British Columbians and coastal people coast to coast to coast. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, my honourable colleague and friend from Courtenay Alberni. I had meant to mention the Coasting Trade Act. If you're looking for it, because it's not one of the features that people hear about a lot under CETA. It's on page 76. We find out, or actually starting at page 75, that foreign ships will be exempt for the first time if they're within the European Union, and exempt from getting the license, and it also affects dredging and other activities that take place in our coastal regions. As a former Atlantic Canadian, I'm very curious about the position of Saint-Pierre-Miquelon. We have French islands off the coast of Newfoundland. I can see it being very easily the case that we'll see foreign shippers registering in Saint-Pierre and saying, okay, now we're European and we don't have to be screened. There's no analysis from, as far as I can see, any entity within the Government of Canada of the impacts on coastal jobs in Atlantic and Pacific Canada from changes to the Coasting Trade Act. And by the way, I meant to mention that before the House Committee on Trade, the civil servants testifying on patent protection said they also hadn't had time to study that economic impact.